Okay, the next section that we are looking at here is what's called precedence tables and activity networks. So, for example, this comes if we're doing a job, and I kind of touched on this when we leading up to when we did the matching and allocation. I kind of touched on there we have certain people doing certain jobs, and that becomes the most efficient. And then of course in the production process, there's certain things that have got to happen before other things can happen. So, example here is if we're going to construct a chair, certain parts of the job would need to occur before another or others could start. So, for example, the timber, you've got to cut the timber first before you can go anywhere, and then there's legs, and then there's seats, and then there's the back of the chair. So there's a whole bunch of different things. Some of those things could occur at the same time, but then others would need to occur. Can't put the whole chair together before all of those things has all happened. So the precedence table gives you the order in which the tasks or activities have got to be completed. So if you have a look here, here's a precedence table, and so here's the things in the job that have got to happen: A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But then there's certain things that have to happen before. So before D can occur, B has to have happened. Before F can occur, C and D has got to happen. But then we then got to look at what's got to happen before C and D. All right, so there's a sequence. All right, but what we can see here is that G, that there's nothing that G is an immediate predecessor for. So that would suggest that G would be the end of the job. All right, so as it says here, from this table, a sequence can be drawn, and that sequence is the activity network. Okay, and as it says there, we label each of these activities here, will go on the edges. And also, as it says, it's often easier to draw the activity network from the finish. So in this one here, G looks like, as I said, G's not a predecessor for anything. So it looks like G's got a is the last thing that happens. So that would be our end point. So let's have a look and see how we might draw that. So if we've got our finish here, so the whole job's finished, and when that finishes, G happens, then the job's done. All right, and these would all have arrows as well, of course. All of these. All right, so before G, we've got E and F. So before G, we've got E and F. They've happened before G. All right, E and F happened before G. So let's go to F, for example. So for F, C and D has got to happen. So C has got to happen, but also D has got to happen. Now this is where the interesting bit occurs. I'll come back to the D, because the interesting bit occurs here is here before E happens, B's got to happen. All right. And before D happens, B's got to happen. So D happens before F, but after B. Now our line of B's connects to here. So D occurs before F, but after B. So that's got to go down here. All right, so sometimes there's a little bit of interpretation, because I could have just gone, okay, well, that heads off here somewhere. But B is a predecessor of both of these, both E and B. All right, so sometimes we need to, while it's easier to work backwards, sometimes we've got to look at, as in this case, D, where does it fit? It fits after B, so B has to happen so before D can happen, so that's got to be in the list. So whatever's happened here, some parts go off and get that done to them, some parts get those things done to them, and then bang here in the end. All right, so there's the B. B, no predecessors before B. D, I've done that one. C, A occurs before that. And so there's A. Now, the thing is, now A and B don't have any predecessors. So because they've got no predecessors, they actually come from the start. So the less complicated way of writing that, doing that, is this. So we go from here, that's A, and then here is our start. So we've got our start, some things go off A, some things go off B, and so on. So there is our table that we've got there, and our network for that particular one. All right, so moving on to the next part, and the next part, as it says here, is dummy activities. So as the text says here, so sometimes two activities will have some of the same predecessors. All right, so up here in this particular one, for example, D and E had B, both had B as their predecessor. So before D or E could start, B had to finish. And this one connects up all right, but sometimes you might need to add what's called a dummy activity. And the dummy activity, there's no cost involved in that, so time or money, no cost involved, but you need it to see where the sequence is going. So here's an example, and this example here, just a simple 5 steps in the task there. A, B, and C don't have any predecessors, so they obviously at the start. All right, so I lost the train of thought here. But yeah, this is where we're up to. We're looking at B. It's already got some circles around it. So B is a predecessor of 2 different steps. So it's a predecessor of D and of E. So let's have a look. This one I'm going to do from the start. So previously I said, work from the finish backwards. Don't always have to do that, but as a rule of thumb, that's probably a lot of the times that's easier. In this case, I'm going to have a start here. And I know that A, B, and C all at the start. Then after A, we've got D that occurs. So after A, we've got D that occurs. And then because D is not a predecessor to anything, after D occurs, we get to the finish. Now for E, E happens, I'll get back to these B's in a minute, but E, after E's got C as a predecessor, which is here. Looks like an E, that's a C. And then, but it's not a predecessor for anything, so when it's done, we're at the finish. Now, you know this, notice here, this B is a predecessor for both D and E. So it's got to happen before D can happen, and it's got to happen before E can happen. So we need to somehow make a connection that after B's happened, boom, we've got a D, because D can't start until both of these have happened. But E can't start till both of these have happened. So what we do is we add in what we call a dummy. All right, so a dummy. And no cost, but it shows the sequence. So we've got one there because B's got to happen before D can start, both. And we've got another, in this case, we've got another dummy down here because B's got to happen before E can start. So these ones here, these here are our dummies. All right, and so all the dummies do is allow us to know what the sequence is. Okay, and as I said, they'd have no cost at all, but if we're looking at up here at D, here D can't start before A and B are done, so we need to have both of them connect into where B is, but because B is also got to happen before E, we need to connect it in there too. All right, and we use that dummy to get the sequence. Okay, so there's 15C questions, and as usual, if you're stuck on anything, make sure you get my help.